Temple Ashaju is joining us from the stock exchanges, I said earlier. Temple, good morning. Let's get you into this conversation across the market and the headline inflation just brought in this morning by the Statistics Office. It's good to have you.
Good morning, Bosing. Thanks a great deal for joining us here live at the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
Yes,
it's impressive to note that actually that the inflation has continued to slow, 11.31%.
Yes, quite a good one. I'm sorry, I apologize. My apologies, Temple. I need to also let our viewers know, and you know, so that Vincent Nwani is here. He's an investment and business consultant. He's the one taking us through the inflation. But again, having his first word on inflation. But the big story for Vincent Nwani here is the pathways to industrialization for the Buhari's administration, what you call the 4x4 economy. Good morning, Vincent.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. You're coming in at the time when we have inflation. Tempo, hanging in there for a few minutes for this. Inflation is coming in through. All the indices, as you have seen, looks very positive. That looks like perhaps we could take this and put it somewhere and make it what you call work in progress.
Exactly. This is a good news. It's a good news number to understand that if you look at inflation numbers in election months, over the last 3 elections I've tracked, you find out that this is the first time in election months you see inflation numbers trending down. So to that extent, it's a good news. All analysts, or most analysts, had expected and projected that all the electioneering campaign from September last year, November, down till January, of course, we take inflation higher. But this number, of course, is something that we have to really
inflation disappoints all of us.
We really need to go back to the table and begin to look at our projection model. But by and large, for all stakeholders, public stakeholders, private sector stakeholders, it's a good news, and it's a good news for investors.
Yeah, perhaps we spent much less than everyone thought that, yes, looks like everybody spent less this election period. We don't have the figures yet. I'm not sure the politicians will give us the numbers.
I hope
they don't release
simulate.
they don't release inflation. Electionaries figure. No, you only know what INEC gets. What every politician or party spend is not the subject of public discussion. But again, this is good as far as inflation is concerned.
That's true.
This is something that will also be taken by private sector when we talk about those in manufacturing.
Exactly. And you find out that one other interesting scenario here is the fact that inflation is beginning to respond to crisis areas in the country. You know, the middle belt, that is the middle belt state, the Federal Capital Territory, Nasarawa and Taraba. You find out these are supposed to be closer to the food basket of the country, where the cost of transportation is lower compared to bringing this food from
in Abuja, you know, at 16%.
So this is also what we need to worry about, that as we begin to build on the good, good news associated to inflation numbers, we should be able to see how we can deal with those crises.
Abuja is just there next to
even Kaduna is also a
about 13%, yes. Inflation, so if we begin to disaggregate and begin to break it down, we begin to, again, look at the impact, the negative impact of the Boko Haram insurgency or this deadly violence across that region, and now it's coming home.
Crisis, I forgot the name of this. Is it the bandits?
The bandits, yes.
We really need to, and we shouldn't just take it that it's a middle belt issue, because this is the food basket of the country. You know, over time, if they're already having this problem of inflation as a result of this violence, it will trickle down to the southern states that consume this food.
So we shouldn't just sit pretty in Lagos and think that it's none of our business. It's everybody's business.
It's everybody's business.
Tempo, but coming here, this is everybody's business if you look at inflation, because if the food basket, North Central, begin to get impacted, that means what we are getting at my 12 market in Lagos, for example, and K2 and the rest of them may begin to bite into our watermelon and other things, isn't it?
Well, that's correct. I mean, we should begin to see changes, because the question that a lot of people will want to ask is that, I mean, how does the inflation numbers affect me? How does it affect my day-to-day activities? The cost of transportation hasn't reduced. The cost of this and that hasn't actually changed. It hasn't gone lower, because every time the inflation ticks down or it declines, we see there's no change in the cost of transportation. But then even when you go to Mile 12 markets, when you go to Sura markets between the mainland and island here, what you still find is that the cost of food is still the same thing. But they keep telling you that in one way or the other, a few things will change. Tomatoes, for example, might begin to change in its price, depending on the season it is coming in. And of course, the same thing will affect things like onions and of course chips. Of course, what chips referring to potatoes, Irish potatoes, and more like that, because these are seasonal crops actually, Bosun.
Yes, but very surprising how this inflation beats all forecasts, isn't it?
Absolutely, it actually beats the forecast of a lot of analysts here. Some have actually projected the fact that the election will push it up, and incidentally, we saw the reverse side of things. I think the monetary policies of the central bank has also been very, very helpful in this regard. It has helped so much to suppress all of those pressure. The daily OMO auctions that the CBN was carrying out really, really helped in February, and of course for the greater part of the Q1 that we've seen until now, that it kind of reduced a bit. So, of course, we know again that when it comes to markets, between the bonds and stocks markets, when inflation continues to nosedive like this, you see these two markets trading inversely as they continue to struggle for capital. And this has also played out in the market. We see a lot of investors, traders, treasurers going more to the debt side of the market as opposed to investing more in the stock market at a point in time. When, yes, the election campaigns were going on and there was so much liquidity, there was an increment in M2, that's money supply. We saw so much of interest initially in the stock market, and all of a sudden we saw a bit of load shedding from the stock market, and that went into the debt markets thanks to the foreign portfolio investors, Bosun.
Yeah, Vincent, weigh in on this.
My first intervention is just to say that, as Temple rightly said, that yeah, inflation have trended down a little bit, but the will I use the word, the common man on the streets, that is Nigerian palace, have not really felt it. Transportation prices have not, we've not seen it go down. The price of bread and everything. See, these numbers are not telling us that the inflation is not there or that prices are not rising. But inflation, this number is just saying that the rate of rise in this number in the price level is declining. Not that prices are not we're not experiencing inflation, but the rate of changes in price, positive changes in price, is not as fast as it used to be.
Yes.
It's important that we make that very, very clear.
Yeah, I think we need to make this clear to everyone as well, that inflation uptick or downtick doesn't happen like a car accident or like a plane falling out of the sky. Sorry to use that, because you don't see that happen like that. Usually a trend.
Exactly, and
yeah,
it has a lag time.
Yes.
It has a lag time. Can I say degree of adjustment, and the speed of adjustment.
Yes. Sometimes a mile, sometimes two, exactly. Sometimes three before
depending on the market you're talking about, depending on the location. So, but what the statistics office is trying to do is to look at the basket, the aggregate, and somehow the aggregate doesn't really show you the can I say the pressure or the velocity of impact at any point in time, but you need time to look to really feel the impact. By and large, we've also seen during the electionary period that stock market was at some point moving up, then the bond market took over because of the interchange between interest rate and everything. Like you rightly said, I believe and I sustain and I suspect that the intervention of CBN really helped to a large extent to moderate the impact of electionary campaign and money supply, the boost in money.
The central bank was active in the last few months, mopping up every cover on the street.
But the question is, what did the central bank do differently this time? If we look at the inflation year, 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, in all this period, the months of February, the months of March, months of April, down till May, we've seen inflation trending up. This is the first time, and I think it is a question for analysts, just like Temple said.
No, you analysts to try and find out what Godwin Emefiele and the rest of his team are doing different this time around. But again, I think it all comes from the fiscal space. Again, because if the body language of the government is, look, we need to spend prudently and what have you, but again, we need to find a way to re-engineer the economy and make growth happen. I think that's the conversation we're having after the break with Vincent Wani, who is an investment and business consultant. We're discussing pathways to Nigeria's industrialization after the break. Stick around, everyone. Temple Ashaju, thank you very much for coming in through here. Stick around with the markets. Look into the numbers. Look at the ticker tips for us. We'll be back with you later on the program. Let's take a break, everyone. We'll be right back in 2.